Yes, guys, welcome back to the Cannon Podcast with Alexander Moneypenny and my very good friend.
I thought you were going to go with the impression off the bat again, and I thought, you know what?
No.
You know what? I'm going to try to do him, and then I realized I suck. I'm not a jukebox.
I don't do impressions, George. I don't do impressions.
I do, people.
So, I do, but yeah, it's so real that I sort of be them. It's sort of beyond an impression. Yeah. How are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm doing well. I think that I'm actually pretty ecstatic, to be honest with you. I'm just enjoying all the content. I'm looking at the team. I'm getting quite excited. I think a lot of the metrics that I have been premonitioning, how would you call that? At least forecasting here on the channel are actually starting to come to fruition. I start to look at our creative numbers. You start to look at Martin Odegaard, the most through balls in Europe, the most open play chances created for a player. You start to look at the widening XG gap that we are starting to produce since Palace, and the numbers that I feel that we've actually talked about for quite a long time. And some people have helped me out with stats. I keep having this bookmark of Newcastle. We've talked about this on the channel. And I think a good friend of ours, well, I don't know, friend, but a very nice person, was able to kind of create some stats for us on Photomob about talking about that pre to post Newcastle. And the jump in the numbers are genuinely staggering. They aren't minuscule or marginal. So I'm excited to see the team showing shoots that are beyond just, let's say, number projections. And it's exciting. It's exciting because I think it's just backing up a lot of what we felt.
It is exciting. Yeah, I like you. I've been enjoying sort of consuming all the content this week. And we're going to add to it. No Bhavs today, unfortunately. Are we still feeling in any way angry about the over celebration stuff, or is that kind of subsided?
I never let it affect me. I find it hilarious more than anything, to be honest with you. And it's kind of like when a baby throws a tantrum, and as far as I'm concerned, I've just accepted that Arsenal will not be given their credit until they win a trophy and are forced to. We are one of the more hated clubs, I've come to realize, not just in general in terms of people being accustomed to whipping us as the whipping boys. I think that's been a long time coming, but it's never fun when the class kind of clown, in a sense, becomes a straight A student. And, that I think is a difficult tag to get rid of. And so you got to marry that also with our history is huge, mate. I know that our recent, I'd say last decade, 2 decades have been mediocre at best, even in the most optimistic of senses. But I think Arsenal and Man United represented one of the more successful rivalries. And I'm wondering right now, personally, I think the next stage, the Pep and Klopp were a very amicable relationship for the most part. And I found that weird, mate, really weird. And I think Arsenal...
Publicly.
Well, yeah. Publicly, sure. But I think even in the media, the way that they were propped up and the teams were propped up, they were never at each other's throats. If you took a snapshot and a case study of Arsenal United in the media at the time, the players, there was genuine hatred between clubs. And I think that that ability of a rivalry, I look at Jose Mourinho and Pep, by the way, same thing, hatred. There was a level of vitriol that I think our clubs kind of emote, I'll be honest with you. And I haven't quite seen that with title challengers of late. And I'm not quite sure where I can put my finger on it, because I still think that whoever challenge Arsenal for the next decade of success, I think we're going to see hate. I don't think it'll be an amicable relationship. And I think it depends, of course, on Pep, how long he stays. But I still think, by the way, Pep and Arteta at the peak of their powers, and even though Pep is kind of on the way towards retirement, I actually don't think it'll be an amicable teacher-mentor relationship.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I wonder, there's so many factors involved in that, right? There is the kind of the culture of football, the culture of England even has changed in the last sort of 20 years. The culture of the England football team in terms of how teams used to be certainly more in pods. And, they always talk about how it was, the Liverpool boys and the City boys. We don't have that or the Arsenal boys at the time, wherever it was. We don't really have that anymore. I think both of their characters I think because they play different types of football. I think because they kind of established themselves as managers. You're right, there wasn't really that animosity, but I do, even in the fallout to this week, I have been thinking along the similar lines, that sort of rivalry that appears to be forming weirdly between us and Liverpool. You wonder if that, if Klopp was going to stay, where that would have gone in the next couple of years. If Klopp stayed for another 2 years and Pep stayed for another 2 years, how that would all, would it be Arsenal and Liverpool at each other's throats, both trying to get at Man City, or would it be different? I don't know. Maybe we'll never know. But one of the big things that kind of came out of the Liverpool game, because there has been a lot of positives, was maybe the slight negative again of Gabriel Jesus not being available. We obviously knew about Thomas Partey, Zinchenko coming out of the game as well. I think 6 months ago, if you'd asked me, Alex, what do you think is the main thing that Arsenal can go and improve on in the summer, or the main thing that we can do to take that sort of next step up? I might have looked at some tactical things. I might have looked at maybe some profiles that were missing from the squad. I might have looked at a number of other things. But I think now it might be as simple as we have to get players who are always available and that we can rely upon. I think the further we get down this project, the more convinced I am by this football, the more convinced I am by Mikel. It's almost like the sore thumb is sticking out even more of Thomas Partey having 4 appearances for us so far this season, of Jesus again struggling with injuries this season, of Zinchenko. I've put them all into a bracket, sure. I don't consider them all in the same problematic area. I think for me, Partey's gone past the line. I think Jesus is approaching the line, and I'd put Zinchenko a little bit further behind because I think because we have different sorts of options. Where do you stand on this? Do you think it's a case of we need to move on from all 3 in the summer? Do you think it's a case of we need to build on top of them? Where do you stand on it? Because I think for me, it's not personal. It's just a case of if you can't rely on a footballer, you can't plan for them. You can't go, you can't say, well, at least we have that profile in our squad and we can go out and do something else in the summer. You have to look at it and start to go, we literally don't know the day before a game whether the same 3 names are going to come out again. And I think at some point we have to start having quite serious conversations about what we do about that.
I think people get personal because these are great players. I think if the question was easy, the debate would be easy. And so the fact that we're having these tough conversations, I think, comes about because we're not talking about players that are just very good either. I think we're talking about players that are potentially on their day world class. And I certainly attribute that with Partey. And I think that Partey is such a unique situation that you can't divorce between the political and between the football, that's never an easy conversation to have. In terms of staying. Now, I think when you start to approach the Jesus and the Zinchenko conversations, I do think those become a little bit easier because those are purely football. So from a Partey sense, I will say this. I have a rule. I don't like getting rid of world-class talent.
Call you crazy.
Call me crazy. But look, when I get rid because I'm hoping to improve. Simply put. So, for example, when I talk about even Zinchenko or Jesus potentially not being in the starting 11, by the way, I talk about that because I believe there could be an upgrade on Zinchenko's quality. Timber. When I talk about Jesus, I love Jesus, but if I was to buy a Victor Osimhen, he becomes an upgrade on the starting quality of Jesus. So, like when I'm talking about removing these players, I don't divorce it from the replacement being an upgrade in that sense. And that's why I find the Partey conversation a little bit more difficult, because when I start to talk about Partey, the player, how many are upgrades on that? Now, of course, everybody starts to throw in the availability arguments, which are completely valid, because what's the point of a gold standard solution if it's available 20% of the time? I hear that. But then my gut is always like, okay, well, if I'm still supplying that wage and able to have that wage, ideally what I'd like to do is build on that. I never like to take away the opportunity of that 20%, because I'm kind of somebody that believes if you've got a talent that is at the world-class level, that is in the top 5% of players worldwide. And that's not easy to find. And even if it's available for 20%, I can use that in 20%. So I look at Jorginho, for example. Why is Jorginho now becoming a conversation to stay? whereas before it wasn't. Before, when people said Jorginho at the start of the season, I would bet if I took a strong poll, 9 out of Arsenal fans, maybe not us, but 9 out of 10 Arsenal fans would have said Jorginho is not part of my plans. Let him leave on a free. Now we see 2 or 3 games against top-level opposition, and I'm willing to bet Thomas Partey, even if he plays 3 or 4 games against a Man City, against a United, and against a Chelsea for 3 games, people are going to start asking those questions again. So fundamentally, to actually give you an answer and not sit on the fence, I believe that you replace in the instance that you're upgrading. If you cannot upgrade, then build to supplement. That is kind of how I view squad building as a whole.
Yeah, and then I think it then becomes a question of, can you do that? And I think it's all very easy, as you say, saying get rid of so and so player, but if you can't actually improve on what they give you for the money that we're looking at a big summer. Every summer's a big summer, right? We say this every year. Every summer's a big summer, but we have a lot to do in terms of, I would say, almost everyone would want something to come in on the wings. I would say almost everyone wants something to come in terms of a marquee forward, whether that's the same thing, or whether we get a 9 and a winger or whatever, but we're certainly going to spend big in the forward areas. I think everyone accepts that. I think a lot of people will want some kind of 6'8". I think a lot of people want a defender. Some people might want a central centre-back. Some people might want an upgrade on the goalkeeper. There's a laundry list here. So when we're looking at upgrading or moving on or whatever, I think I mean it more in the sense of not having to rely on these players. And I agree with you. If we're only needing Partey for 20% of the season, then maybe comfortable doing that for another year. If we're only needing Jesus and Zinchenko for certain games, then I'm comfortable doing that. Whether they'll accept that is a different question. But I think personally, in terms of that idea of the first 15, the first even the first 11, those 3 names, Partey for me has gone out of those names. He's a bonus if he's around, and he's a fantastic player. I agree with you. If he can come in and show us that world-class talent that he has 20% of the season, then great. But I do think now I'm getting closer and closer to the line where Jesus and Zinchenko, I both go, look, you're fantastic players. You give us so much, but you're not Declan Rice for us. You're not William Saliba for us. There are issues in your game, and if we then can't rely on you, I then start to go, I have to start to, consider whether you are in my first 15 and what we do about that moving forward.
I think that when you talk of the first 15, you talk of the 20% of games. That's where I think a lot of the argument comes into, right? So then the question becomes, it's not just an availability question for me. It also becomes a versatility issue for me. I'm always going to be more amenable to Jesus staying because I think he's one of the most versatile forwards in world football. I'm getting very frustrated that his conversations with injuries aren't paired with Partey's, though. Like, if we're going to sit there and bemoan Partey's availability, have a look at Zinchenko's injury history, mate. It is not much better, especially in terms of percentage of games played. Like, Partey has been around longer than Jesus, but look at the percentage of games played and games started for Jesus and compare that to Partey. Those numbers are getting closer together. They're not getting farther apart. So I think if you're going to get rid because of availability concerns, then you have to have the same energy with Jesus. And I must admit, in terms of an asset, right, I see a potential decline there. I see a potential worry physically. I will admit, I'm starting to see that separation issue a lot more. Now, he's an intelligent footballer. He will be able to, I think, extend his career brilliantly. But I have question marks about the long-term value. And then I look at Zinchenko and I think, if Timber was around, do I really think Zinchenko is playing as much as he's done? I really am not confident on that answer. So with those ideas in mind, those are upgradable assets, right? I can buy a versatile forward that I think gives us more physical separation on the market. I think I can do that. I think I can buy a left back, for example, that gives us an alternative to Yuri and Timber that I can get for value. In terms of a 6'8", that's where I struggle with that position. I think the 6'8" position for me is the most unknown signing in the next 6 months. I'll be quite honest with you because I don't see a clear upgrade. I don't see somebody, even at the £100 million mark, I would be saying, yep, that is for sure the Declan Rice partner. I see nobody in that bracket, and then I see nobody in the prospect bracket that I would be like, I'm willing to grow with you because I know you'll be world class.
Not Yusuf Fofana? No? Okay. Yeah, there's... And because I know some people will be thinking Zubimendi, but again, I'm beginning to struggle. I don't know. I look at...
Because, you know what, I'm going to throw it back to you as a question because I'd love to hear your opinions. Because right now, look, there are two camps, okay? And if you want to go by links, in quotes, there's Zubimendi and there's Onana. Both equally linked, okay? As strongly, by the way, and as credibly. But would you not agree those are very different midfield ideas going forward? And where do you see Arsenal going with all the metrics of our counter-press, disrupting opponent build-up in terms of the difference between Arsenal and City? Like, which philosophy do you see us more aligning with down the line? And which one do you see us able to replicate? Because the idea is you'll lose one of Jorginho and Partey, right?
Yeah. I think if you look at our counter-pressing numbers, you look at the way what Mikel demands in the duels, you look at our second balls, you look at how we've played against Liverpool and City, I just can't imagine a Zubimendi-esque player coming in and being the base of our midfield. And I think that's where he would play, because I can't see him starting further up, and maybe he does, but again, I
could see him in the Jorginho role that we saw at Liverpool.
Yeah, maybe in certain games, but I think for under this manager, I can't see Zubimendi coming in and playing further up. Personally, I think his best qualities lie further back, and I can't see Mikel consistently wanting that type of six, a bit more of a dictator, a bit more of a controller in every single game, which then means you go on to say, well, are you going to go spend 70 million or whatever you might cost, release clause or whatever, to go and do that and, put another cog in the midfield when you've just gone out and got Havertz? I don't know. And just returning to the Timber, the Jesus Zinchenko and Partey thing, arguably, we went and replaced those in the summer. You could argue there's a school of thought, at least, to say Jesus, Havertz was another option. He played against Liverpool. You could argue that Timber was the Zinchenko replacement. You could argue that Rice was the Partey replacement. So you could make that school of thought. Look, it's going to be interesting whatever happens. I just, for me, to kind of round this part of the topic off, that first 15, for me, Partey has now stepped out of it. If he could, mate, and there'd be no one happier than me if he comes in and plays himself back into it at the end of the season. But I just think, for me as a fan and for Arsenal as a club, we can't rely on him moving forward. And I think Jesus and Zinchenko, as you mentioned, I think Jesus has played something like 51% of the available minutes for Arsenal, something like that. I think Scott Willis, there was a stat out there from Scott Willis that
that's what I was referencing.
The numbers aren't good at all. So he's beginning to, the further his Arsenal career goes on, it's nothing to do with do I like the player, it's nothing to do with do I like the talent, it's about the availability and about is 51%, if you're listening to this and thinking, get rid of Jesus, is 51% of the available minutes played enough for you? Is it? And if it's not, then we have to have a different conversation. He's not out of it yet, and neither is Zinchenko, but the question mark remains. On the flip side, George, just like Bhavs. On the flip side, we heard the news this week that Jurrien Timber has been added to the Champions League squad, which means obviously Arsenal are hopeful he's going to play some kind of part. You'd presume against Porto. I don't know. I mean, maybe they hope that we'd get him moving forward, but I don't know. Does it get refreshed every time? Or is it just for the sort of the per round? I don't know.
No, you can, I think. I'm pretty sure you can refresh it every time. Right. But look, I don't know if you can call it a canon exclusive. I've always felt that he would be back around this time. And we said Porto.
It's not a canon exclusive, but you have said that. I don't think we could say I predicted he'd be back for Porto. But yeah, no, it's obviously exciting news. It's something, it's been long anticipated. There's been all sorts of question marks. Oh, he's out for the season. He's going to be back in November. There's been all sorts of timelines out there. I think it's about when the sort of the predictions were saying sort of March-ish time when he'll be back in sort of full training, properly involved in contention. What sort of impact do you think he can have towards the end of the season? Thanks for checking out the Cannon Podcast. To hear the full episode, sign up as a YouTube member on this channel or go to patreon.com/thecannonpod.